I remember the sky that night, a color I have never seen before nor since. It wasn't black nor blue, but a sort of bruised violet, heavy and unbreathing. The air smelled of copper and wet cotton, and even the crickets were silent, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I was 29 then, a carpenter by trade, and I lived in the town of Hollow Bend, Louisiana, a place that was quiet on the surface but rotted through beneath it. That night, the first scream came from the manor on the hill, the Grayblood plantation. It wasn't the sound of pain. No, it was the sound of something discovered, the kind of scream that can only come when a person sees something they weren't meant to see. I was in my small house when I heard it, but every window in town seemed to rattle with it. The dogs howled. The horses kicked their stalls. And then nothing, silence thick as honey. By morning, word had already spread. She found him, they said. The mistress found her husband with the men. Nobody dared speak more. The children were sent indoors. The preacher locked the church. I remember looking toward the plantation from the main road, its white columns bright as bone, and thinking how even sunlight refused to touch it that day. Something had been uncovered. Something that wanted to stay buried. Her name was Margaret Elmswood, though we called her Madame Gray behind her back. She was 32, tall as any man, with hair black as ash and eyes the color of old whiskey. She had come from Virginia to marry Thomas Elmswood, the owner of the Grayblood plantation, a man who inherited too much and worked for nothing. He had charm like a serpent, and she perhaps believed she could tame him. But something in her changed that night. When I saw her the next morning, she was standing on the front porch of the plantation, staring at the horizon like she was reading scripture written in the clouds. Her dress was white but smeared with mud, and her hands shook as if she'd been holding lightning. The townsfolk gathered at a distance, whispering. No one dared cross the fence. Even the enslaved workers kept to the trees, eyes down, waiting for her to speak. When she finally did, her voice didn't sound like her own. She said, "The Lord sees what men do in the dark, but he has no tongue, so we will be his voice." That was the first time I felt the air move differently in Hollow Bend, like the town itself had been swallowed by something alive. The preacher tried to approach her. She only smiled, thin and quiet. "Tell them," she said, "there will be a gathering. Every soul in Hollow Bend will attend." And so it began. By the second evening, the plantation yard had turned into a kind of altar. Torches lined the fences. Every family in town stood there in silence, faces pale and wet from the heat. I remember the crackle of fire and the way shadows bent against the house like black hands reaching. Madame Gray stood on the front steps, calm as stone. Behind her were 3 men, enslaved, shirtless, trembling, and between them, bound and gagged, was Thomas Elmswood, her husband. His once perfect suit was torn, his eyes wide with a terror I could feel in my own throat. No one moved. Not even the preacher spoke. Madame Gray's voice was low when she began. "You all know this man. You trusted him. You prayed beside him. You gave him your business, your faith, your silence." Then she turned her gaze toward the men behind him. Those same men she had called his property. "And you," she said softly, "you are witnesses, not sinners." It was then I realized this wasn't justice. It was something older, something ritualistic. The air pressed down on us. The torches dimmed. I heard a woman faint behind me, and through all of it, Thomas tried to speak, but his voice came out like a sob, muffled, broken. That's when the first crack of thunder rolled over the plantation. Though there wasn't a cloud in the sky, I will never forget the sound, a storm with no rain, no lightning, no wind. Just thunder rolling through a cloudless sky. It made the horses wail and the babies cry. The preacher fell to his knees, clutching his Bible so hard it bent in his hands. Madame Gray didn't flinch. She looked up at the heavens, then back at us, and said, "The Lord has accepted the offering." We all stared in disbelief, yet something in her tone, something ancient and hollow, made us believe her. I could feel my heart beating in my teeth. I smelled iron in the air, though no one bled yet. The slaves began to hum, low, rhythmic, mournful, a sound that seemed to rise from the soil itself. And then she spoke again. "You've all turned from God. You've all hidden your sins in barns and bedrooms and prayer. But he does not forget." Thomas began thrashing, trying to shout through the gag. She only turned her head slowly and whispered, "Let them see what pride brings." I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I wanted to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. Around me, others were frozen too, as though we were trapped in a dream we'd all agreed to share. That was when the torches flared, suddenly bright as day, and every face in that yard looked wrong, distorted by the light, hollow-eyed and desperate. I wish I could say someone stopped her, that one of us had the courage to speak. But no one did. Not the preacher, not me, not a single soul. What happened next can't be written in words that feel human. The sound, not the sight, is what stays. The sound of rope tightening, of wood creaking, of breath leaving a man's chest like wind through a hollow reed. I couldn't look. None of us could. But we all heard it. Madame Gray never blinked. She stood before the gathered town as her husband's sobs turned to silence. And when it was over, she said only, "He is forgiven." But something else changed that night. The earth beneath the plantation seemed to pulse. The torches flickered, though there was no wind, and one by one people began to collapse, like fainting, gasping, trembling. When I awoke, the yard was empty. The torches were burnt out, and the manor was utterly silent. The next morning, the preacher gathered us in the chapel and told us never to speak of it again. He said God had witnessed justice and it must never leave Hollow Bend. But I remember the soil that day, black and wet, though there had been no rain. And in that earth where the torches once stood, something was moving, something that hadn't died. The morning after the gathering felt wrong from the first breath. There was no bird song, only the rasp of cicadas frozen mid-cry. The sky looked too pale, the sun a dull coin pressed against the clouds. I walked to my workshop and found every tool coated with a thin film of ash. It wasn't from fire. It was from something else. A residue of that night settled over town like guilt turned solid. The preacher didn't open the chapel. He nailed its doors shut himself. Men who once joked outside the general store spoke only in whispers. And at the plantation, Greyblood stood empty. Yet we could see smoke rise from its chimneys after dusk. Some swore they heard voices, a low hum like the one the enslaved men had sung before the thunder came. I told myself I'd imagined it, that nightmares could cling to waking hours. But then the children began to draw. Chalk figures on fences, black suns and crooked crosses. No one had taught them those shapes. No one could. By evening I saw Madame Gray again, walking the road toward the river barefoot, eyes open but unseeing. Her dress was the same white one from that night, now gray with dust. She didn't look at me, yet I felt as though she had, and in that silent stare I understood. Whatever had been buried in Hollow Bend wasn't beneath the ground anymore. It was walking among us. 3 days later, the first man vanished. Ezekiel Croft, the miller who'd stood nearest to the torches. His wife said he rose before dawn, went to start the wheel, and never returned. When we found the mill, the water still ran, but the wheel turned backward and against the current. The air inside smelled of sap and iron. The walls were streaked with handprints that weren't mud. That afternoon, the town gathered again, this time without summons. Everyone stared at the preacher, as if he could explain the impossible. He tried, spoke of judgment, repentance, atonement, but his voice cracked halfway through the word, forgive. He dropped his Bible then, and when it hit the ground, every candle in the church guttered out. At night I heard tapping on my door. 3 knocks, spaced evenly. When I opened it, no one was there. Only a line of footprints leading away, bare and wet though the soil was dry. Sleep became something dangerous. Dreams filled with that violet sky, with Madame Gray's whisper looping over itself like a prayer. The Lord sees. And when I woke, I swore I could still hear her, not in the air but in the wood of my walls, like the house itself was learning to speak. By the week's end, we all stopped asking where Ezekiel went. We already knew. Grey blood was taking its tithe. It was the 10th night when she came back to town. No carriage, no escort. She walked straight down Main Street with the calm of someone returning from prayer. The moon followed her like a lantern. Every window she passed dimmed. Lamps sputtered out. Dogs hid beneath porches. She stopped in front of the chapel's nailed doors and pressed her hand against the wood. We heard the nails groan, then fall, and one by one, like metal confessing. Inside, the preacher screamed once, short and sharp. By the time we reached him, he was alive but blind, eyes glazed white as chalk. He kept repeating, "She showed me the mirror. She showed me the mirror." Madame Grey didn't stay. She turned toward the river again, and this time the water rose to meet her ankles, though the bank was dry. Some said they saw shadows moving beneath the surface, shapes that had faces. I couldn't look. I only remember her voice, all soft, almost kind. The Lord has eyes now. After that night, half the town fled. The rest of us stayed because leaving felt worse, as though crossing the county line would drag the darkness behind us. And maybe it would, because Greyblood was not just a place anymore. It had become a heartbeat, steady and patient, waiting for us to listen. A month passed without sunrise. The days were gray and the nights glowed faintly, a strange twilight that made the river shine like glass. People began to hear music from the water, a choir of low humming voices. Some thought it was the men from that night, their souls trapped beneath the current. Others said it was us, our guilt echoing back. Children stood on the banks listening, mouths open as if to learn the tune. Old Mrs. Henley said the melody was a psalm played backward. I didn't want to believe her, but when I closed my eyes I could hum it perfectly, though I'd never heard it before. Madame Grey was nowhere to be seen. Yet her presence lingered, in reflections in the stillness between heartbeats. I began carving crosses into my walls, small and uneven. Each morning one more appeared that I hadn't made. The preacher's corpse was found by the riverbank 2 weeks later, kneeling, hands clasped in prayer. His lips were wet with mud, and when they pried them open his mouth was full of river water, still moving like a living thing. That's when we understood the river wasn't water anymore. It was memory, and it was learning our names. On the final Sunday before Hollow Bend vanished from maps, we gathered again, drawn by something we couldn't resist. There was no church, no sermon, only the old square, the bell that hadn't rung since that night, and the air thick with salt. Someone began to chant, and the rest of us joined before realizing it. Words older than any scripture. The ground trembled like a living chest beneath our feet. I looked toward Greyblood Manor. Its windows burned with light, though the house had long been empty. Then I saw them. Figures at every window. Hands pressed to glass. Dozens of them. Some faces I recognized, some I didn't. All staring out, not pleading, just watching. A wind swept through, carrying ash instead of dust. It coated our tongues, tasted of iron and smoke. Someone screamed that Madame Grey was coming, but when I turned, I saw only my own shadow stretching toward the manor, longer than it should have been, reaching up the hill like it wanted to touch her. The bell tolled once, and everything stopped. No breath, no sound, no time. That's where my memory ends. Some say Hollow Bend sank into the river that night. Others say it never existed. But I know what I saw. And I know she's still waiting, in the dark between thunderclaps, where the Lord lends his eyes to the unforgiven. When I woke the next morning, there was no sound in Hollow Bend. None. Not even the creak of floorboards or the hiss of wind through the cane fields. It was as if the world had forgotten the concept of noise. I called out, once, twice, and heard nothing in return. The silence was so thick it pressed on my chest like water. I walked through the square. The houses stood open, doors ajar, curtains moving though there was no wind. Tables were still set for meals that would never be eaten. I found a teacup still steaming, though no one had touched it. It was as if everyone had stepped away for just a moment and never returned. Down by the river, the air shimmered like heat above a road. I saw figures there, faint and translucent, whispering without voices. Their mouths moved in rhythm, the same rhythm as the hum I'd heard before. I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. My reflection in the water looked back at me, lips moving before mine did. It whispered something I could not hear, but I felt it. Behind my ribs, inside the blood. A wordless command. When sound returned, it wasn't the world's sound. It was breathing. Not mine, not anyone's, just breathing, steady, patient. I realized then silence was mercy. What replaced it was truth, and truth was far louder than I was prepared to bear. I began to write everything I remembered, hoping that by trapping it in words, I could keep it from spreading. The handwriting was not my own. The ink turned from black to brown to red as I wrote, as though the paper itself was bleeding memory. Each morning, I found new pages stacked neatly on my table, sentences I didn't recall writing, describing moments that hadn't yet happened. The letters spoke of the town, of the manor, of Madame Gray walking the river at night, her reflection moving before she did. One passage chilled me more than any other. When the bell rings again, the writer will join the river. I threw the pages into the fire, but the flames dimmed instead of rising. The smoke that rose smelled sweet, almost pleasant, like lilac. Then I saw the handwriting again, not on paper this time, carved faintly into the wood of my walls. The same line, the same promise. The letters began to appear in other homes, too. Mrs. Henley's parlor walls were covered with them. The schoolhouse blackboard filled overnight with a script no one recognized. Even the trees bore words beneath their bark. Every letter spoke of forgiveness. But forgiveness, I realized, was the cruelest kind of punishment. It meant we were remembered by something that refused to let go. I hadn't seen my reflection since that first day by the river. Windows blurred, mirrors cracked. Even water refused to show my face. Then one morning I woke to find a small patch of clean glass on the table. A mirror perfectly polished, untouched by dust. I shouldn't have looked, God knows I shouldn't, but I did. And the man staring back wasn't me. His eyes were darker, his mouth slightly open as if waiting for a cue. When I tilted my head, he moved a moment later. Delayed, watching first, mimicking second. Behind him, behind me, stood a woman. Barely visible, more suggestion than form. Her hair floated as though underwater. Her mouth moved, but her words came from inside the mirror, echoing in the air around me. "You will finish what began," she whispered. I dropped the glass, but it didn't shatter. It bent like water rippling, then returned to stillness. And for a moment I saw Hollow Bend reflected in it, not as it was, but as it used to be. Children laughing, bells ringing, sunlight pouring over green fields. Then it darkened. The laughter turned to screams, the sunlight to flame, and I saw her, Madame Gray, standing in the square holding that same mirror, whispering prayers backward. When I looked again, the glass was empty. But my own shadow stayed on it a moment longer than I did. It began as a vibration beneath the ground, faint and steady like a pulse. The animals had vanished weeks before, yet the air carried the scent of fur and sweat. I felt the tremor under my boots rising up my legs, until it settled behind my eyes, a pressure, insistent and rhythmic, then faint at first. The bell began to ring, once, twice, 3 times, each toll slower than the last, dragging across the sky like the sound was being pulled apart. I ran to the square, though I knew better. The bell tower stood untouched, but the bell swung by itself. Its rope had turned to vines pulsing with light. The town had returned, or something wearing its shape. People stood motionless, facing the tower. Their eyes were open but lifeless, pupils clouded over. When the final toll sounded, their heads turned in unison toward the manor. I heard a voice, not Madame Gray's, but something older, say my name. The sound of it made the air shudder. I fell to my knees and covered my ears, but it was inside me now, ringing through my bones. The bell wasn't calling us to worship. It was calling us home. And for the first time I realized Hollow Bend wasn't being haunted. It was the haunting. The path to Greyblood Hill was overgrown, but I followed it anyway, guided by a light that wasn't fire. Every step felt heavier, the soil clinging to my boots like hands. When I reached the gates, they opened before I could touch them. The house was just as I remembered, yet every window flickered faintly, as if something breathed behind the glass. Inside, the air shimmered, warm, damp, alive. Portraits lined the hallway, their eyes glinting as if wet. And then I understood they were eyes, not paint, not glass. Watching, waiting. The farther I walked, the louder the hum grew. A vibration that matched my heartbeat, then overtook it. In the center hall stood the mirror, larger now, framed in gold leaf blackened by time. My reflection waited, smiling faintly. Then Madame Gray stepped out from the darkness behind it, or maybe from within it. Her voice was calm, almost loving. "The town is ready," she said. "All that remains is remembrance." I asked her what she meant, though my throat was dry and my voice felt borrowed. She pointed toward the reflection, toward me, and said, "You never left." And in that moment I saw what I'd refused to see for months. The man in the mirror had been free all along. I was the one trapped. The mirror breathed. I swear it did. Its surface rippled like a pond stirred by unseen fingers. When I reached toward it, my reflection didn't mirror me this time. It leaned closer, smiling. Behind him I saw the town. Hollow Bend whole again, sunlight spilling over the fields, laughter in the air. But then the image cracked. Every sound stopped. The laughter folded into silence, and through the fractures I saw something else. A vast darkness pulsing like a living organ. From within it shapes moved, slow, patient, familiar. Madame Gray stepped closer to the mirror from the other side. Her expression wasn't cruel. It was pitying. "You think you were witness," she said. Her voice layered like 1,000 echoes speaking together. But witness and participant are one and the same. The glass rippled again, and for a moment, I saw the night of the gathering, the torches, the crowd, the trembling air, but from a different angle. I was not among the people. I was on the porch. Standing beside her, the mirror began to hum. I felt the vibration deep in my skull, in the hollows behind my eyes. My reflection lifted its hand and pressed it against the glass. I did the same. The surface was cold, wet, like touching the skin of a drowned man. And then I remembered I had never left Greyblood Hill. Not truly. The town, the silence, the letters, they were reflections. Echoes caught between glass and gilt. I turned and the hallway behind me was gone. In its place stretched a long corridor of mirrors, each reflecting a different version of Hollow Bend. One glowed gold and green, untouched, alive. Another was drowned, rooftops glinting just beneath black water. A third showed the town burning, the people frozen mid-prayer as ash fell like snow. Each mirror whispered. Some begged, others sang, but the one at the far end stood still, dark, silent. When I reached it, I saw only the outline of myself, faint, blurred. Behind me, no reflection at all, and then slowly other figures began to form. The townspeople, the preacher, the miller, children, Madame Gray, all standing in rows behind me, eyes hollow but fixed. They were not trapped. They were waiting. I felt the truth slide into me like a knife without pain. Hollow Bend had never been punished. It had been preserved. A still life of sin and confession, looping endlessly beneath the surface of history. We were the memory of judgment. And I, the last one left to remember, was its mouthpiece. The mirrors began to fade one by one until only mine remained. I touched it again and the surface rippled. But this time I didn't see my face. I saw the river. Its surface gleamed like glass stretching into eternity, and from beneath it, countless eyes opened. The hum changed pitch, rising until it became something almost human, a choir without language rising and falling like breath. I realized it wasn't coming from the mirrors anymore. It was coming from within me. Each heartbeat echoed through the house like a drum. The portraits along the walls began to weep, slow streams of water pooling on the floor. The sound grew louder, forming words I didn't recognize but understood all the same. They meant come home. I stumbled into the main hall. The front doors stood open. Outside, the entire town shimmered, faint and translucent like a mirage. Figures moved through the streets, their gestures rhythmic, synchronized. The same chant from the river, carried now on air. The sound burrowed into my ears, into my chest, until it became indistinguishable from my own breathing. I fell to my knees and pressed my palms against the ground. It pulsed beneath me. The soil was warm, alive. Madame Gray's voice came again, but it wasn't from the mirror this time. It was everywhere, in every breath of air. The Lord sees through those who remember. And then the realization hit. This sound, this heartbeat, this chant. It wasn't the town calling to God. It was God calling to us. Or whatever had taken his place. The air split like fabric tearing and light poured through, too bright to be holy. I write this now by candlelight, though the candle burns without flame. The ink moves before the pen touches the page. I don't know if this confession will reach anyone beyond the glass, but I must finish before the bell tolls again. I remember everything now. That night on the hill, I wasn't standing with the crowd. I was standing beside her. I had helped her tie the ropes, helped her light the torches. I had believed it was justice divine and righteous. But the moment it began, something else stepped through, something that wears justice like a mask. It took Thomas Elmswood first. Then it took the crowd. Then it took her. And it left me not as punishment but as keeper. The task was simple, to remember so that the memory would never fade. Because forgetting would free it. Every generation someone hears the story, someone repeats it, someone writes it down, and each time they do, a little more of Hollow Bend wakes up again. If you are reading this, if you've heard my voice, it means the story has crossed the mirror once more. It means I have done my duty. But know this, the story isn't a warning. It's a door. The bell rings even now. I hear it from somewhere beyond the fields, a single note that stretches through centuries. The mirror before me glows faintly, not silver but deep violet, the same bruised sky that covered us that first night. I see faces forming in its light. The preacher, the miller, Madame Gray, even Thomas, all watching, patient, waiting for me to step through. I feel no fear anymore, only recognition. I was never meant to escape. None of us were. We are the story that keeps itself alive. The candle goes out. The ink dries midward. The air smells of rain, though there are no clouds. I touch the mirror one last time. It's warm now, pulsing like flesh. The bell tolls once, and the world bends inward, as if inhaling. They say Hollow Bend vanished in 1847, swallowed by flood or fever or fire. But that's not true. It's still here, waiting behind every reflection, every whispered tale of justice gone wrong, every old house that hums when thunder rolls. And when you look into your mirror tonight, if the air feels too still, if the light flickers blue for just a moment, you'll know what I mean. You'll see what I saw. You'll understand that the story has found you, and you'll hear it too. The sound of a bell, tolling softly just once, for you.